How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Kuf Tes Vav, Daf 115 of Masechtas Zevachim. Friends, we are getting close. Now it's starting to feel close. Now, as I pointed out, most Masechtas, once we cross the 100-page mark, I'm starting to smell the end. Not Zevachim. Daf 115 out of 120, already I'm starting to feel like, hey, I think we're getting close. Anyways, Daf Kuf Tes Vav could be divided into two. Difficult, not difficult. The first part, the first Amud, is difficult. The second Amud is not difficult. And I'm kind of hoping, hopeful, that the second Amud represents a transition, because in the second Amud, let me just talk about what the Daf talks about. So the first Amud, Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph, discusses the complicated topic of Asham bachutz for mechuser zman. Sounds complicated, right? I mean, it's not like, this is kind of within the realm of the things we've been discussing recently, so it's not like, where did this come from? It's kind of some more of the difficult stuff that we've been working with in terms of shchutei chutz, hamayle bachutz, mechuser zman. Okay. So we're going to discuss that. That'll be Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Now, Kuf Tes Vav Amud Beis, though, we already start transitioning in. If you remember in the Mishnah that we learned the other day, we started talking about the Mishkan and Bamas and the different, the Mishnah had said that when the Yidden, before the Mishkan was built, people had Bamas and the avodah was the Kohanim, was with the bechors, and then once the Mishkan was built, then the avodah was with the Kohanim. We're going to discuss that on Daf Kuf Tes Vav Amud Beis, and I'm kind of hoping that it's a transition into that part of the Mishnah, and I'm hoping that it'll be like the last, at least 5 daf of Masechtas Zevachim will be a little bit lighter, and maybe I can get ahead a little bit. Or, anyways, who knows? It's always good to be hopeful. I saw recently about farmers, that farmers are by their nature tend to be optimists that next year is going to be a better year. Anyways, I'm hopeful that maybe the last 5 pages things will lighten up a little bit. Al Kopanim, whatever the Rebbeinu Shalom sends us, we're going to take with a smile, as we're going to learn about Aharon and Daf Kuf Tes Vav Amud Beis. Vayidom Aharon, when he heard the Besorah about his children. Friends, let us jump into Daf Kuf Tes Vav of Masechtas Zevachim. Friends, we are going to begin on Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis, about, I'd say, like 8 lines or so from the bottom of Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis. Amar Reb Chilkiah bar Tuvi lo shanu ela lishmo aval shelo lishmo chayva overall the shelo lishmo bifnim. Who wants to tell me what this is talking about? Oh boy, it's tricky, friends. Okay, first of all, before we can even talk about what Reb Chilkiah bar Tuvi says and his machlekes with Rav Huna, let's go back to the Mishnah. In our Mishnah, we had a machlekes between the Tanna Kama and Reb Shimon regarding, what were the Mishnah's words? Regarding kol shu ra'ui lavo lachar zman areze below saise ve'ein bo karis v'chacham omim kol she'ein bo karis ein bo lo saise. That Reb Shimon, that there was a machlekes between the Chacham and Reb Shimon regarding kol shu ra'ui lavo lachar zman, something that is temporarily not offerable, but in the future will be. What were some examples of that? A balmum over, a korban that has a temporary blemish, a turtle dove that is not yet mature enough to be offered, but will be mature enough in the future. Oso ve'ez bino, if you slaughtered in the Azara the mother animal, so then you can't slaughter the child that day, but tomorrow you can. Wait till tomorrow. So with regard to, what do I call them? Issues that prevent, but that are temporary issues. So we saw machlekes. Reb Shimon said you're over on a lav. So for example, a turtle dove that is not mature enough, if you offer it bachutz, Reb Shimon says you're over on a lav. The Chacham say you're potter. Now, one of the things that the Chacham said that you are potter for was mechuser zman. Similar to what we were talking about just now, about kol shu roi lavu la'achar zman. So, mechuser zman, so there were two definitions of mechuser zman that the Chacham say that you're potter for. One definition is if the animal is simply not old enough, right? An animal has to be, right? Shor or kesev, or eiz, ki, voled, v'hoya shivas yom, what was it? V'hoya shivas yomim im imo or something, uv'meyom ashmini yerotza the korban Hashem. Something like that. The pasuk, the Torah says that, right, that an animal that is not yet 8 days old cannot be offered as a korban. You can only offer a korban once it's 8 days old. So if you have an animal, it's mechuser zman, it's not yet 8 days old, so then you can't offer it. And if you offer bachutz, the chacham say it'll be potter. Okay, simple enough. But there was another type of mechuser zman, and that was regarding the owner. Examples of that might be azava, who they have to wait 7 days without seeing whatever they saw that made them a zav or a zava. So in the interim, right, so now zav and a zava, at the end of their zav and zavaing, they bring korbanos, they bring two birds, a chatas and an ola. That chatas and ola, you have to wait until they're done being zav and zavas. What if they brought it prematurely while they're not yet done? Or a yoledes brings also a chatas and an ola. When she's done, right, if for a boy after 40 days, for a girl after 80 days, what if she brings these korbanos before then? She's not yet ready. We discussed a mechuser. Mechuser has a whole purification process. A week here, another week there. Then the korbanos brings an asham, an ola, a chatas. Similarly, we talk about a asham of a nazir. When he becomes tamei, nazir becomes tamei meis, he has to wait a week, and then he brings a korban asham. So in all these examples, if you have these people that have to wait until a certain point before they can bring their korbanos, before that point, they aren't yet ready to bring their korbanos, and if they do, the chacham said potter. Right? That would be mechuser zman b'baylim, that the owners are not yet ready to bring their korbanos, and the chacham said potter is there as well, right? We said mechuser zman, the chacham says potter. Reb Shimon said you over an alam. We said mechuser zman could be alts the animal, if the animal is not yet old enough to be offered, but it could also be alts the owner, that they need to wait till a certain point to be able to offer their korbanos, and they aren't yet at that point. The Mishnah then divided that into two categories, though, specifically about the owners. When we're talking about the owners are not yet ready, that was divided into two categories based on what they're offering, based on what the owner is offering. So, for example, if you have a mechuser who's not yet ready to be bringing his korbanos, said he needs to wait another day or two or whatever it is, he's not yet there. So a mechuser brings a few different kinds of korbanos. He brings an asham, but he also brings an ola, he also brings a chatas. So, regarding the chatas and the asham, the Mishnah had said that if the mechuser brings the chatas or the asham prematurely, so he's potter because you have to wait until you're done. Right? You can't just bring a chatas or an asham for no reason, right? An ola, a shlamim, sure, you could bring it as an avodah if you want. You could bring in a ola, a shlamim whenever you want. Chatas and an asham you only bring when you need to. And the reason why this mechuser needs to bring a chatas and an asham is because he was a mechuser, and at the end of his purification process, he brings a chatas, an asham, and ola, but he's not yet done, so he has no business bringing the chatas and the asham now. And if he brings the chatas and the asham today, when he's not yet able to, so since if you would actually bring them into the Beis Hamikdash, they would be possible because he's not yet ready for them. So if he offers them bachutz, he's also potter. So the Chacham says potter in that case. But the Mishnah points out, if the mechuser were to bring an ola prematurely, he would be chayiv for that, since he can always just bring an ola as an avodah or a shlamim. Now the thing is that a mechuser doesn't bring a shlamim, but a nazir does. A nazir brings a shlamim, right? When he's done being a nazir, so we could talk about a nazir bringing a shlamim prematurely. So we said when it comes to an ola, when it comes to a shlamim, this person who's not yet ready would be chayiv for bringing those korbanos, since they could be brought in the Azara as a Nedava. So you'd be chayiv for those. But the Asham and the Chatas, they would be potter for, since if they brought it in the Beis HaMikdash, it would be possible. So therefore, if they do it bachutz, they're going to be potter for that. Givaldig. With that introduction of saying that when it comes to a mechuser zman, so when I'm talking about mechuser zman for the most part today, I'm talking about Azav, Azava, Yoledis, a Mitzara, a Nazir, who are not yet ready, right? These people who are not yet ready to be bringing their korbanos. These owners who are not yet ready to be bringing their korbanos. So we had said in the Mishnah that when it comes to these mechuser zman people, when we say that they're potter, it depends which korban we're talking about. Potter for Asham and Chatas, because even if they brought it in the Beis HaMikdash, they brought it inside, but bifnim, it would be possible. So bachutz it's potter. But by Ola and Shlamim, they would be chayav, since they could bring it in the Azara as a neder, as a nedava. Okay. So now Reb Chilkiah Bar Tuvi says something very interesting. We're going to see now machlokes between Reb Chilkiah Bar Tuvi and Rav Huna. What Reb Chilkiah Bar Tuvi says that's very interesting is that actually, friends, even when it comes to the Chatas and the Asham, when the Mishnah says potter, not always. There's a chilik there. Because, as we know, from the very first Mishnah of Masechta Zevachim that we've quoted 1,000,000 times, we could probably say the first Mishnah of Masechta Zevachim by heart already. Kol hazvachim shenishchetu shelo lishman ksherin elish lo alu levaylim shem chova chutz min achatus min pesach. I think I probably got that more or less accurate. That the first Mishnah in Masechta Zevachim says that a korban asham that's slaughtered shelo lishma is kosher. So listen to this twist. That we had said that if this mechuser zman person, well, the only example of that really would be, of an asham would really be it could be either a mitzara, or it could be a nazir who's become tameh, and then when he becomes tar, he brings an asham as well. But anyways, let's talk about a mitzara. This mechuser zman mitzara. So we had said if he brings his asham bachutz, he's going to be potter, because if you would bring it bifnim, it would be possible, since he's mechuser zman. He's not yet ready to bring it. But Reb Chilkiah Bar Tuvi says an interesting idea, which is, what if the mitzora were to bring this asham bifnim as an ola? It would be kosher. It wouldn't be ola levaylim shem chova. I mean, it wouldn't count as his asham that he needs to bring as a mitzora. Fine. Okay, he's not ready to bring that asham yet. But it would still be a kosher. It would be kosher. It would be kosher. So Rav Chilkiah Bar Tuvi says, wait a second. Even when it comes to a mechuser zman guy, when it comes to this mitzora, technically this asham he can offer in the Beis HaMikdash l'shem an ola. It would be kosher. An asham that's slaughtered as an ola is a kosher korban. So actually, when the Mishnah says Rav Chilkiah Bar Tuvi, that a mitzora who's mechuser zman slaughters in asham bachutz, he's potter. That's if he slaughters it to be an asham. But if he slaughters it to be an ola, he would be chayav, since he could slaughter that asham in the Beis HaMikdash as an ola. So he would be chayav if he slaughters the asham outside the Beis HaMikdash, outside the Azara, as an ola as well. He'd be chayav for that. So even when it comes to the asham, that the Chacham in the Mishnah said that the mitzvah would be potter for offering the asham bachutz if he's mechuser zman, that's only if he slaughters it as an asham. But if he slaughters it as an ola, he would actually be chayiv bachutz, since he could technically bring it in bifnim. Chevra, this daf took me the whole day yesterday just to learn Amud Aleph. This is why. How many? We're 10 minutes into the daf, more than 10 minutes into the daf. We're still just laying down the groundwork to be able to learn the daf. Chevra, over the past 6 years, I've learned that a daf that takes a long time to learn and a long time to review is going to take a long time to record. I learned this principle already many years ago, and it has remained consistent. Let me drink a stick of water. Okay. Now, says the Gemara, so again, Amr B'chilkia Bar Tuvi, Lo Shanu, that when the Chachamim said that a mechuser zman person is potter for slaughtering an Asham bachutz, that's el lishmo, that's only if the mitzora whose mechuser zman is slaughtering the Asham to be in Asham, because if he would do that in the Azara, it would also be possible since he's mechuser zman. Aval shaloi lishmai, but if the mitzora that's mechuser zman is slaughtering the Asham as an ola, chayav however the shalolishma bifnum, he would be chayav bachutz, since if he slaughtered that Asham as an ola in the Azara, he would be chayav, so he'd be chayav bachutz as well. Yachi, if that's the case, the shmo namini chayav. But then, wait, why don't we say also that if the mitzora slaughtered the Asham as in Asham, he's also going to be chayav. He won't be potter. Ho'il, since this animal is technically fit, the shalolishma bifnim. Technically, right, so meaning even if this mitzora slaughters the Asham bachutz as an Asham, I could still argue that he should still be chayav, since this Asham could be brought into the Azara and slaughtered as a ola, so he should be chayav bachutz even when he slaughters it as an Asham. So change the word ba'i to mechuser as they go to bachutz. So mechuser akira, yeah, but you haven't yet done that, kilu. If you're bachutz and you say, I'm slaughtering this Asham as an ola, okay, slaughtering the Asham as an ola, you'll be chai for that. But if you're slaughtering the Asham as an Asham, or even stam, kilu, so long as he hasn't said, I'm slaughtering it as an ola, so then it's still an Asham, and you'd be potter for that bachutz, since it would be possible bifnim. Chevra, I just also want to point out that I've specifically been talking about the Asham because, of course, a chatas, as we learned in the first mission in Masechtas Zevachim, a chatas that slaughtered shelo lishma is possible. So, kilu, either way, the chatas you're going to be potter for, because if this mitzora slaughters, that's mechuser zman, slaughters the chatas bachutz as a chatas, he's going to be potter. It would be possible b'fnim, and therefore, if he does bachutz, he's potter. And also, even if he slaughters it as an ola, if you would do that bifnim, it would be possible because it's shalol lishmo. So and also bachutz, even if the mitzora who's mechuser zman slaughters the chatos as an ola bachutz, it would still be potter, since it would be possible if you did that. It did the same thing in the azor, since it's not in the shma, and chatos is one of the examples that need to be the shma in order to be kosher. Now, maskif lo Rav Huna now. Rav Huna has a big problem with Rav Chilkiya's opinion, and I understand his problem, which is Rav Huna has, in my opinion, I think it's a valid argument. Rav Huna says, one second. Let's be rational over here. Yes. The first Mishnah of Masechtas Zevachim, a Givaldiga Mishnah, it kicked off the whole experience, life-changing experience of climbing Mount Zevachim. This is like unbelievable what we've done over here already on Daf Kuf Tez Vav, although not quite on Daf Kuf Tez Vav, because it's still on Daf Kuf Yudal. We haven't even gotten to Kuf Tez Vav yet, but of Masechtas Zevachim, it's mind-blowing. Tell all your friends, they'll all be impressed. You get a badge. I learned Masechtas Zevachim. I climbed Mount Zevachim. Al Koponim. The first Mishnah of Masechtas Zevachim says that in Asham, that's slaughtered as a ola, it doesn't say it explicitly, but it says if it's slaughtered shelo lishma. So as an example, in Asham that's slaughtered as an ola is kosher. Says Rav Huna, let's be rational for a second. If we want to be rational for a second, we'd say that what that Mishnah means is that a korban asham that is meant to be offered as a korban asham, and obviously if offered as a korban asham would be kosher, even if you slaughtered it as an olah, and you might think, wow, I messed up, it's no longer kosher, it's still kosher. It won't count for your obligation to have brought an asham, but it's still kosher. Kilu, we're starting from a place where the thing that it's supposed to be would be kosher. That an asham slaughtered as an asham would be kosher, and even if you slaughtered it as an olah, it's still kosher. Says Rav Huna, but a scenario where the asham itself is pasul? Don't tell me that you're going to make it kosher now by slaughtering it as something else that it isn't even supposed to be, somehow slaughtering a asham that is pasul. But if you slaughter it as an olah, as a completely different korban, that's what's going to make it kosher? That's insane. Keilu, when the Mishnah says that something shalol lishma is kosher, it's starting from a place of kashrus, and then you make a mistake, you do it l'shem olah, it's okay, don't worry about it. It's still kosher. But to say that in asham, which milichatchila is pasul, you're now going to make it kosher by slaughtering it as an olah, that's ridiculous, says Rav Huna. Who's ever heard of such a thing? I think it's a fair argument. So again, Maskif Rav Huna asks a kasha on Rav Chilkiah. He says, "B'chayesh l'cha davar she'eino kosher lishmo." Is there such a thing that when you do it lishma properly in the best possible mehudadik way, it's pasul? And v'kosher shelo lishmo, and when you do it wrongly, shelo lishmo, now it's kosher? That's insane. V'lo, one second. Is it so insane? V'arei Pesach. What about the Korban Pesach? Finally, we're on Daf Kuf Tezvav. Givaldig. 20 minutes into the Daf. Took us 20 minutes to do 5 lines. Givaldig. Pesach b'sha'ir mois hashoneh. The Korban Pesach. What about Korban Pesach the rest of the year? The Eino kosher lishmo, the kosher shelo lishmo. A Korban Pesach, there's a tiny, as we know, there's a tiny window to slaughter the Korban Pesach that is an Erev Pesach in the afternoon. Azoy. You better chap a within those few hours. Otherwise, the rest of that's the only tiny little window that you have to offer the Korban Pesach. The rest of the year, slaughtering a Korban Pesach as a Korban Pesach, pasul. But slaughtering it as a shlomim, kosher. As we know, most are Pesach Karev Shlom. So the Gemara says, there you have it. A Korban Pesach, the rest of the year, slaughtered as a Korban Pesach is pasul, but slaughtered as a Shlomim is kosher. So again, Pesach b'shayim mos hashana, de'eino kosher lishmo, slaughtering as a Pesach is pasul. The kosher shelo lishmo, but it's kosher if you slaughter as a Shlomim. Pesach b'shayim mos hashana, Shlomim ninu. To which the Gemara says, not a good raya, because a Korban Pesach outside of its window is not a Korban Pesach, it's a Shlomim. Most are Pesach Karev Shlomim. A Korban Pesach the rest of the days of the year is a Shlomim. And by offering it as a Shlomim, you're offering it as what it is supposed to be. And therefore it's not like it's a Korban Pesach that you should be offering as a Pesach and it would be pasul, and now you're doing it as something else and it's kosher. No. Pesach the rest of the year is a Shlomim. Offering it as a Shlomim is offering it correctly. Let's drink a stick of more water. Now, for the rest of this Amud, for the rest of the difficult part of today's daf, we are going to be making arguments in support of Rav Chilkiah against Rav Huna. We are going to have essentially 3 main arguments, three main points that we're going to bring up in support of Rav Chilkiah against Rav Huna. Here is number 1, let's say that the following supports Rav Chilkiah. Here we go. Yachol sha'ani motzi. Is it possible that I will exclude from shchutei chutz, from the isser of shchutei chutz? I.e., the following would be potter for shchutei chutz. Af olas mechuser zman b'bailim. Okay. That a korban, okay, if you have mechuser zman b'bailim, okay, so let's say you have this mitzvah that we've been talking about. He has to bring an olah. So is it possible that this ola, that if this mechuser brings in ola when he's not yet ready, is it possible that he will be potter for an ola? V'asham nazir, v'asham mechuser, or the asham of a mechuser, or the asham of a nazir, if he becomes tameh. I believe that I'm about 95 or so percent sure that the asham of a mechuser, of a nazir, is when he becomes tameh. When he is done being a nazir, he brings I believe he brings a ola chatas and a shlamim, and I think if he becomes tameh in the middle, he has to wait a week, pariyaduma, all that stuff, and then he brings a korban asham and starts over again, I think. Anyways, so if this mechuser or any of these people that are mechuser zman bring in ola, or the asham of a nazir, the asham of a mechuser, is it possible it would be potter for them? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says by shchutei chutz, it says sure. I'm going to read the pasuk. The pasuk says by shchutei chutz, ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat, sure, o kesef, o eis, b'machne asher yishchat b'chutz hamachne. The pasuk says sure, kesef, eis. The thing is, you didn't really need to have kesef eis. You know what? Sure, kesef eis. Honestly, you could have just said ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat b'machne. Sure, any person who slaughters in the camp. Slaughters what? A cow, sheep, goat, anything that could be a korban. Right? You're not bringing a korban from anything else. Birds, I guess, but you're not any beasts or anything. So kilu, I would know already that it includes shor kesef and ace, right? So why does it supposed to say shor kesef and ace? To include these three things. Tamlama shor mikol makom, kesef mikol makom, ace mikol makom. Even if it's an ola, even if it's an asham, mechuser, asham nazir, you'll be chayiv for those things. Okay, no, so what did we just say? We had a half minute to say that maybe you should be potter for this ola, that you should be potter for these ashams. But we say, shor kesef, you're actually chayiv. Now, here's the thing. In our Mishnah we had said, of course, by an asham of a person who's mechuser zman, so this mechuser or a nazir, the asham is, you'd be potter. Since you can't bring it now, but right, because it's premature, and yet we're saying here in the brisa, I would have a half minute to say that you're potter, but actually you're chayiv. And also it says what, or what doesn't it say? Viluchatas shayra, and conspicuously, we're specifically talking about an asham. We're not talking about a chatas. Why didn't it say that maybe you'd be chayiv for a chatas? So interesting. You're going to be chayiv for an asham, but you're going to be potter for a chatas. So what's going on here? But my skin, what are we talking about? Ilema bizmanoi. If we're talking about on time, that it's not premature, that it's time for the mechuser to bring his asham. Well, if that's the case, it's also time for the mechuser to bring his chatas, and he should be chayiv for a chatas as well. So my area asham afilu chatas nami. Why are we specifically saying an asham is chayiv? And a chatas you would also be chayiv for bachutz bizmano. So shelo bizmano. Fine. So it's talking about shelo bizmano, when it's not yet time for the mechuser to bring his chatas and his asham. And yet we're saying that the asham you're chayiv for, the chatas you're potter for. Uvimai, what are we talking about? If it's offered as a asham, well, you would be potter for that, since you can't offer it as an asham inside. It's premature. Asham amai chayiv. Why would you be chayiv for the asham? You should be potter for the asham. It's premature. You should be potter for the asham. So ela lav. So why are you chayiv for the asham? Shelo lishmo. Here's the answer. Because you're slaughtering the asham shelo lishmo. So it's premature, but you're not offering it as an asham, you're offering it as an ola, for example. And therefore, that is why we're saying that you're going to be chayav for the asham, but you'd be potter for the chatas, because the chatas that's offered as an ola is also going to be possible. But an asham offered as an ola is kosher. If you would do that bifnim, you would be kosher. So bachutz, you're also going to be chayiv for that. So we see that it's a raya for Rav Chilkiah, who says that when we say that you're potter for an asham by mechuser zman by Babble, you're potter for an asham when it's slaughtered as an asham, but if it's slaughtered as a ola, for example, you would be chayiv for that. A raya for Rav Chilkiah. Rav Huna says the olam bizmanu v'shelo lishmo. V'Reb Eliezer de Omar makshin al-asham l'chatas v'tana tova wadin ikr. Rav Huna gives a very interesting answer. Rav Huna, his answer is that actually it's talking about bizmano and shelo lishmo. It's talking about where it's time to offer the korbanos. It's time to offer the korbanos. It's time to offer the korbanos. And we're saying that you're chayiv for the asham when it is shelo lishmo. And this is a shtickle chiddush. This is kind of a shtickle chiddush. Yeah, it requires to use your brain a shtickle. I think my brain doesn't want to be used so much right now. Okay. So. Rav Huna is a very interesting chiddush here. We're gonna have to work through this together. I mean, it's not so. It's a bit of a chiddush. I hope I'm understanding Rashi correctly. I think so. I don't know how else to understand it, but it's a pretty big chiddush. So basically, okay. Rav Huna says no. It's not talking about when it's mechuser zman and it's a asham slaughtered shelo lishma. No, that's not what it is. We're talking about it's bizmano. It's time for the mechuser to bring his korbanos. Okay. And now we're saying that the asham is chayiv. It's chayiv for the asham. And what's the chiddush? Of course, he should be chayiv for the asham. If it's bizmano and he's offering the asham bachutz, he should be chayiv, right? But it was offered shelo lishmo. Okay. So we're saying that the asham bizmano, but it's offered as a ola. And here's the chiddush. The chiddush is that this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. That Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that when the pasuk says kachatos ka'asham, it means that we treat an asham like a chatas, and therefore the Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that just like a chatas shelo lishma is pasul, as the first Mishnah in Masechtas Zevachim, so is an asham shelo lishma. An asham shelo lishma is pasul. So now, if an asham shelo lishma is pasul, so then we're saying now it's bizmano. It's time for the mechuser to bring his korbanos. He brings his asham, and he slaughters the asham bachutz shelo lishma as an ola, and still we're saying he's chayiv. But why? If we're saying it's Rabbi Eliezer who says that an asham slaughtered as an ola, shelo lishma is pasul, he should be pater bachutz. Since if you would do this bifnim, slaughter the asham as an ola bifnim, it would be pasul, so it should be pater bachutz. Why are we saying he's chayiv? Here's why he's chayiv, friends. Very, very, pretty big chiddush. Because what's going on over here? What's going on is, remember, this is according to Rabbi Eliezer who says that an asham shelo lishma is pasul, like a chatas. What he's doing is, it's time to bring his korban asham. He's a mechuser, is on his, the day that he brings his korbanos, he brings his korban asham. And now he's outside of the azar. And he says, I'm going to slaughter this asham as an ola. Here's the thing. At this point, the animal is still kosher, because at this point, you could take this, right? He says, right, declares that this asham I'm going to slaughter as an ola. But at this point, he could still take the animal, bring it into the azara, slaughter it as an asham, and it would be 100% kosher. So the declaration bachutz that he's going to be slaughtering this asham as an ola is essentially irrelevant, because you could still right now take this animal, bring it into the azara, slaughter it as an asham, and it would be completely kosher. If in the azara he says, I'm slaughtering this asham as an ola, that then proceeds to slaughter as an ola, okay, it would be pasul. But the declaration bachutz that he's slaughtering this asham as an ola doesn't actually make the animal pasul, because you could take, can hijack the animal right now, bring it into the, right, take the animal now, bring it into the azara, slaughter as an asham, would be completely kosher. So therefore, at the time that he's slaughtering the asham bachutz, technically it's still kosher, because it could still be brought into the azara and it would be kosher. So therefore he's going to be chayav. So it's talking about where he's slaughtering the asham bizmano shelo lishmo, and still he's going to be chayav, because even the declaration that he's going to be slaughtering it as a ola doesn't actually make the korban pasul, and therefore he's chayav for shchutei chutz. And the same thing would apply to a chatas. If you can ask them, why does it only, if we're saying that the halachas are the same for an asham and for a chatas, why is it only saying that you chayav for the asham? What about the chatas? Chatas as well. That's exactly right. Since the halachas are exactly the same for a chatas and an asham, so I mentioned asham, which is kind of what the Gemara is referring to as the tafel case. The chatas is the main place that is Pasul Shalol Lishmo, and because of Kachatas Ka'asham, we say therefore the same applies to the Asham, and therefore if we're saying that the Asham is going to be Chayiv bachutz, the same would apply to the Korban Chatas. So it says the Gemara again, the Olam Bizmano. So it's not talking about when it's Shalom Bizmano and that you're slaughtering an Asham as an Ola, and it would be Pasul as an Asham, but now it's kosher because it's Shalom Lishmo. No. It says Ravuna. No. It's talking about Bismano. It's time to offer the korbanis. The mechuser is ready to offer his korbanis. V'shalol lishmo. And the Asham was offered bachutz. Shalol lishmo. He says, I'm going to slaughter it as an ola. And still, he's going to be chayv. Rabbi Eliezer, it's going to Rabbi Eliezer who says that an Asham slaughtered as an ola would be pasul. But the chiddush is that nonetheless he would still be chayiv bachutz, since technically you could still take this animal even after the declaration. You could take it in and offer it as an asham, and it would still be kosher bifnim, because it's bizmano. You can offer it as asham bifnim, so you're still going to be chayiv bachutz. Rabbi Eliezer the Amar makshin asham lechatos. Rabbi Eliezer holds that we compare asham to chatos, and just like chatos needs to be lishma, so does an asham v'tana tafel v'ad in ikr. And we say, right, we teach us about the tafel, about the asham, but the same halacha would be for the korban chatos. Azoi, okay, so we asked the kasha on Rav Chilkiah. No, we have brought a support for Rav Chilkiah asking a kasha on Ravuna, but Ravuna found a way to say it's not talking about a mechuser zman person, it's talking about bizmano, and it's a chiddush about Rabbi Eliezer, etc. Okay, drink a little more water. Now we're going to bring another round where we're going to try to bring a proof for Rav Chilkiah, and Rav Huna is going to reject that proof, or at least wiggle his way out of the proof. Tashma coming here. Yochel shani marbe. Is it possible that I will include in the prohibition of shchutei chutz, in the chiyuv of shchutei chutz, olas mechuser zman begufa? If you have a korban ola that's too young, it's 7 days old, it's not yet 8 days old, is it possible I will be chayiv for shchutei chutz? The chatos, what about a korban chatos? Would I be chayiv for a korban chatos? Bein begufa, bein bebailim, whether it's 7 days old or whether the owner, a mechuser, let's say, is not ready to bring his korban chatos. Is it possible I'll be chayiv in that case? Talmud lomar, vel pesach oyel moyed. Well, the pasuk says that you're chayiv when you should have brought it to the Beis Hamikdash, but you didn't. Anything that to begin with had no business being brought to the oil moed, you're not chayiv for. So therefore, a korban chatos, whether it's because it's too young or whether because the owner is not yet ready to bring it, we're saying you're going to be potter. We said maybe you should be chayiv. No. You are potter. Bilu asham shaira. And conspicuously, we're specifically saying that a chatos mechuser zman, right? Specifically, we said chatos bein beguf bein ba'ile, right? We're saying we're talking about mechuser zman by the chatos, and we left out asham, implying that you're potter for the chatos, but by an asham mechuser zman, you would be chayiv for. How so? If we're talking about mechuser zman that is slaughtered as a chatos or as an asham, well, just like you're potter for the chatos, you should be potter for the asham because it's mechuser zman. It's not yet time. Right? Asham nami liftrei should also be potter by an asham. Elalav shelo lishmo. Rather, it must be talking about that it's being slaughtered as an ola, and we're saying that the chatos, nonetheless, you are potter for, because chatas shalol lishma is possible, and therefore you're going to be potter bachutz. But in Asham you'd be chayiv for, because in Asham shalol lishma is kosher, like assuming like the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Zevachim. So a Asham shalol lishma is kosher, and therefore you'd be chayiv bachutz. And it's a raya for Rav Chilkia, who says that an Asham slaughtered shalol lishma would be chayiv bachutz. So again, we say no, le'olam shalol lishma, ve Reb Eliezer he demakish Asham mechatas taneker v'koshken letofel. And once again, Rav Huna would simply say that it's talking about where it was offered shalol lishmo. Right, so you have the chatas that was offered as a ola, and we're saying that you're going to be potter for the chatas, and you're also going to be potter for the asham, because this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that kachatas ka asham, and asham is just like a chatas, and just like by the chatas, you're going to be potter also for the asham, and when it says chatas, so you're potter, of course, it's the same halacha for the asham. So again, the olam shalol lishma, we're talking about this chatas was slaughtered, right? So the mechuser is not yet ready to bring it, and it was slaughtered premature, right? So the mechuser was not yet ready. Then brought this chatas, he slaughtered it as an ola, right? Shalol lishma. Rabbi Eliezer and this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, the makish asham l'chatas, who compares an asham to a chatas, and therefore just like the chatas shalol lishma, you're going to be potter for bachutz, so also the asham. And Tana Iker, the Tana mentioned the chatas, which is the main source of, right, needing to be the shma, the choshkin, the tafel, and the same would apply to the tafel. Rashi says he doesn't understand why it's choshkin, but okay, fine. So again, it's not talking about that you'd be chayav for an asham shalol lishma like Reb Chilkia, rather you'd be potter for an asham shalol lishma, because it's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and it's just like a chatas that'd be potter shalol lishma. Sheesh, my brain is starting to get mushy. I think I'm going to pause the video for a minute to let my mushy brain settle for a second. All right, friends, and now for the final push here on this section of today's daf, on this Amud. Tashma d'chi Omar, Tashma d'chi Yosser of Dimi Omar. When Rav Dimi came from Babble to Israel, he said, Tana devei by Levoy. That was done the perspective by Levoy. Yochol shani motzi af olas mechuser zman bebayim asham nozev asham mitzarab. Okay, this is bad. This Tana devei by Levoy is essentially the first price that we had. Okay, it's literally the first price. It's good. The word's going to be a little bit weird for the next few lines, but Be'etzem, it's literally going through the same thing that we did. If you can rewind your brain two notches, it'll be 2 notches back, right? So if you want, you could look at the top. You see, it's literally the same scenarios, right? So Yochel Shani Moti is a possible that it will exclude from Shchutei Chutz Af Olas mechuser zman bebaylim, right? If you have this mechuser is not yet ready, it's korban ola. Would you be potter for that asham nazir, asham mechuser? Would you potter for asham nazir, asham mechuser? When the mechuser is not yet ready, my tamuda amar ravina shor mikomakum kesef mikomakum eis mikomakum. As we said earlier, it didn't need to say shor v'kesef eis, but it says it to include these 3 scenarios. Okay. Ho my rumya. But why is it okay? Like, why? We already went through this earlier. Kilu, we had wanted to say that why would you be chayiv by the asham? Must be talking about where it says it's shalol lishma. The mechuser isn't ready, but his asham is slaughtered as a ola, and therefore he's chayiv. It's a support for Chilkia. But we said no. You could say it's like Rabbi Eliezer. That whole thing. Like, why are we bringing this up again? Rav Nachman Yitzchak says, this is why we're bringing it up again. Mishum de Rami Tana Devei. By Levoy, Adatani Levi. I'll tell you why. Because there's more to the story here. That's just part 1 of the story. There's another side of this coin that Rav Dimi now compares this with a brisa that Levi taught. I imagine My assumption is it's from Levi's Toseftas. Right? Levi had his own Toseftas. Reb Chia and Reb Oshaya, they edited the Tosefta. Reb Levi, I believe, had his own Toseftas. So Reb Levi taught, right, Toseftas was just collections of brises, right? Just like Mishnayos for collections of, I guess, the brises that were put into the Mishnayos, I guess you could say, were the Mishnayos, and, there's teachings in the Mishnayos with the Mishnayos, and everything else with the brises. And then Reb Chia and Reb Oshaya had their own collection that they put in the Tosefta, which is kind of more authoritative. Levi had his own Tosefta. And then I think there's just kind of like random brises that are not as, when Titania, when you learn in a random brisa, it's not quite as authoritative as if it were like a Tosefta, or certainly not a Mishnah. Anyways. So Levi taught, Asham Nazir, Asham Mitzara, when it comes to Asham Nazir and Asham Mitzara that are offered on time and everything, Sheshachatan Shalol Lishman, offered Shalol Lishman Ksheri, and V'lo Adu Ba'alim Shum Chova. Okay, just like we learned in the first Mishnah of Masechta Zevachim. If you have a Korban Asham that's slaughtered Shalol Lishma, let's say as a Ola, it's kosher, just it won't count as the Asham that needed to be brought. Now, Shachatan mechuser zman b'bailim. Now, what if we're talking about a Mitzora or a Nazir who offers this Asham when they're not yet ready to offer it, prematurely? Oh, Shayu b'nei shtei shanim v'shachatan. Or if the Asham was 2 years old, right? Generally, the assumption is that an Asham is a ram that's I believe 2 years old. However, I think that's for like Asham Me'ilos, Asham Gezelos. A Asham Mitzvah and Asham Nazir is a lamb in its a sheep in its first year. I believe a male sheep in its first year. I believe. Now, if it's 2 years old, it would also be right psulin. So say in all these cases is psulin. No, what's the question? The question is that Rav Dimi, here's the question. It's a gewaldige question, friends. The question is that Rav Dimi had contrasted these two brises. The first brisa that we mentioned at the top of the Amud, he's re-raising it. And he's contrasting that with this brisa from Levi, where we're talking about in Asham, where the owner is not yet ready to bring it. A premature Asham. Mechuser zman b'bailim. Which means that, what's the question? The question is that what Rav Dimi is saying is that in the first brisa, when we're talking about Asham, we're talking about mechuser zman b'bailim, and we're saying chayav, and yet over here we're saying that mechuser zman b'bailim by an Asham would be pasul, and if it was shrutei chutz, it would be potter. So Rav Dimi's question is, how come in the earlier brisa we said that mechuser zman b'bailim is chayav, and here we're saying mechuser zman b'bailim is potter? The way that we answered it earlier, is he can answer it now? Umeshani Rav Dimi, and Rav Dimi answers it, lo kasha, it's no problem. Kan lishmo, kan shelo lishmo. That, well, in the second brisa, in Levi's brisa, it's talking about where the Asham was the Asham, right? It was mechuser zman b'bailim. The Asham was offered shelo lishmo. No, the Asham was offered the shmo, and therefore it's pasul, and therefore it'd be potter bachutz. The first brisa where we're saying chayav is because it was offered shelo lishmo, and therefore he's chayav, and it's a raya for Rav Chilkia. Now the point that Rav Dimi, right. The fact, the proof here against Rav Huna that's so potent here is that from the fact that Rav Dimi is asking this question, he's comparing these two brisas with the assumption that the first brisa is talking about where it's not bismano, means that he had some kind of misora. He was convinced. He knew that the first brisa is talking about where it was premature, where it was mechuser zman b'bailim. And therefore, he's therefore comparing it to Levi's brisa, which is also talking about mechuser zman b'bailim. You see, Rav Huna had wiggled his way out of that question by saying it's talking about bismano shelo lishmo. It's talking about bismano, not mechuser zman. But here, Rav Dimi is coming and saying, no, that brisa is talking about mechuser zman b'bailim. And the question is, if that price is talking about mechuser zman b'bailim, and this other price of Levi is talking about mechuser zman b'bailim, how come in the first price it is chayv and in Levi's price it is potter? And therefore he answers it by saying, because in the first price it was shelo l'shmo, and Levi's price it's l'shmo. And therefore it's a proof for Rav Chilkiah. Rav Ashi Rami Masnisan Abraisit. Rav Ashi had asked, how could it be that in our Mishnah we said that you're potter for the Asham, and in that brisa that we just quoted, it says that you're chayiv for the Asham, at the brisa that we quoted earlier on the daf, and just now Rav Dimi brought it up. You're saying you're chayiv for the Asham. Umishani and Rav Ashi also answered kan l'shmo, that you're potter when it's l'shmo, v'chan shelo l'shmo, and you're chayiv when it's shelo l'shmo. Lemitavatu to Rav Huna. So would this be a question of Rav Huna? I mean, okay, we seem to have this brisa that we're convinced is talking about mechuser zman b'bailim, and we're saying chayiv, and the only way to explain it is because it's shelo l'shmo. This seems to be a pretty strong argument from a brisa against Rav Huna. Rav Huna will say, no problem, I'll tell you why he's chayiv when it's mechuser zman b'bailim. Hacha b'ma'iskin, we're talking about kigon shehifish shtei ashamis la'achrayis. The last little thing we have to use our brains for a minute, just to wrap up the sugya, bear with me, that it's talking about where this mitzvah had set aside two animals to be his asham, just in case something happens to one of them. He's got the other one ready. He doesn't have to go, find a new animal, scramble. He's going to take two animals, and one of them he'll offer as his asham. And if anything happens to one of the animals, he knows he has a spare. If everything goes smoothly, the other one will be yirat sheyistayiv. You let it, right? It will be an asham sheniskapru bailim be'acher. Of course, when it comes to chatas, it would be one of the chatos mesos. When we say kol shebechatas mesa ba'asham yirat ba'asham roeh. So therefore, this would be an example of you offered one of the animals as an asham. The other one you're going to let graze until it gets a moment. That will be offered as an olah sketzam mizbeach. So the chad b'nai meikara olahi, which means that therefore one of these animals is destined to be a korban olah ketzam mizbeach, and he then slaughtered it bachutz as an olah. So here you have an asham. So because it was an asham that slaughtered as an olah, but it was one of these animals anyways was destined to be an olah. So it's not that he's offering an asham that would be possible as an asham, but because it was shelo l'shmo is chayiv. No, says Rav Huna, this animal is destined to be an olah anyways. So he slaughtered a bachutz, is chayiv for slaughtering an olah bachutz. Kid Rav Huna Amar Rav, Rav Huna Amar Rav, asham shenitak l'riya v'shachto stam kosher olah, that if you have an asham that needs to graze, like this animal, that is the backup animal that is ultimately going to be let out to graze, and it's slaughtered stam, it would be as an olah, because ultimately it's going to be sold as an olah. So even if you slaughter it now as an olah, it will count as an olah, and that's why he's chayiv bachutz, not because he did an asham shelo l'shma. No, he slaughtered as an olah because it was destined to be an olah, and that is how Rav Huna explains it. Friends, you made it. The rest of the daf is not going to be so difficult. The Mishnah had said, the Mishnah had listed a whole list of things that if you offer them bachutz, you are potter. One of the rabbis taught, how do I know that if you are maila bachutz, meat of a korban chatos, umi b'sar oshim, the meat of an oshim, umi b'sar kochim, or the meat of shalmei tzibur, umi b'sar kochim kalim, or the meat of a shlamim, for example, kochim kalim, umi moser omer, or from the leftovers of the korban omer after the kometz has been burned on the mizbeach, v'shtei alechem, or the two breads that are offered on Shavuos, v'lechem aponim, or the weekly showbreads, v'shari menachos, or leftover menachos after their kometz has been burnt. Shepater, I don't know that in all those cases, if you go outside and burn them on an altar, bachutz, you'll be pater. Tam lomer ola, because in the pasuk by shchutei chutz, it meant by ha'alah bachutz, it means the shayala ola ozavach. So ma ola shehi reuya la'alah, just like an ola is fit to be offered on the mizbeach. Of course, so we're talking about things that are fit to be offered on the mizbeach. Meat of a korban, for example, you eat it. You don't burn it on the mizbeach. So therefore, you're potter for that. How do we also know that somebody who goes outside of the zara and pours oil on the flour of a mincha, Babble, and mixes that mincha together with its oil, poses, and breaks it up after it's been baked in the oven. Ve'amoleach, or somebody salts a korban, va'menif, va'magish, or waves a korban, or brings it, or brings the korban to the mizbeach. Va'mesader, I guess do that outside, bring it to the altar, I guess outside. Va'mesader ashulchan, or if one possibility is you take out the shulchan outside of the azara and start organizing it outside of the azara. V'meitivis haneres, or bring the menorah outside of the azara and start cleaning it out and taking care of it there. V'akometz, somebody takes a kometz v'makabel bachutz, or somebody does kabbalah sadam bachutz. Shepater, I don't know, in all these cases, shepater tamilomar asher yaile ola o zavach, one who burns on the mizbeach an ola or a zavach, maha'allah shigmar avodah, just like burning something on the mizbeach is the final step. Av kol shu gmar avodah, you're only chai for final steps, not like mixing and salting and all these things which are kind of like in between kind of steps. If you do those bachutz, you will be potter. And now we are transitioning to the section of the part of the Mishnah where we begin talking about the Mishkan and who does the avodah and the Mishkan at what point, and bamas, and at what point what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. So the discussion now for the rest of the daf is going to be who did the avodah already at Har Sinai. Right? By Har Sinai, the pasuk says, "Vayishlach es nare b'nei Yisrael, vayalu olos, vayizbechu zvachim shlomim l'Hashem parim." It says that by Har Sinai, the nare Yisrael offered olas and shlomim. Who were these people? Who was offering these korbanos on Har Sinai? Now, friends, I was doing a little bit of research earlier. I have in my mind, there's this narrative that the Bechoris were supposed to initially be the Kohanim. The Bechors, they were the ones that were going to do all the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash and everything. But they messed up at the Cheder Egel, and therefore it was taken away from them and given to the Leviim instead. I tried looking it up a little bit. Where did that come from? I asked ChatGPT. It gave me some directions and stuff. I don't know that. I don't know. It is, I think, a thing. But anyways, I just want to point out the Gemara doesn't seem to be assuming that. So just in case anybody was wondering, because we said the Mishnah had said that but once we got to the Mishkan, once the Mishkan was built. Until the Mishkan was built, the avodah was by the Bechors. Once the Mishkan was built, the avodah was by the Kohanim. There was no mention of Cheder Egel or anything like that. It seemed like it was by design. Initially, the avodah was meant to be, initially the avodah was Bechors. Came the Mishkan. Now, from that point on, it was by the Kohanim. Also, Kihuna it seems like it was by design that the Kohanim were always supposed to be Kohanim. Right? We had seen the other day that the pasuk says Va'arona Levi, that initially Aaron was supposed to be the Levi and Moshe was supposed to be the Kohen, and this was before the Cheder Egel. I think it's pretty clear that there are clear indications that the Kohanim were always supposed to be the Kohanim. It's not like if there was no Cheder Egel, then the Kohanim would just be sitting around. Things would be different. I think that it was always meant to be that the Kohanim would be working the Beis Hamikdash. So I kind of just have a flag there about what's the angle of what's the role of the Cheder Egel in terms of the Bechors. I don't know. The Gemara today isn't exploring that, isn't bringing that up, isn't saying about the Cheder Egel. Just in case anybody was like me and was wondering, didn't everything go south for the Bechors, came the Cheder Egel? I don't know. Right? Because when the Mishnah says that the Bechors did the avodah until the Mishkan was after the Cheder Egel, right? I think it was after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur was when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the second luchos, right? I think. Hopefully I have my things in order. So, so that was after the Cheder Egel. So if we're saying that the Bechors did the avodah until the Mishkan, it seems like even after the Cheder Egel they were doing the Mishkan. Anyways, whatever. I'm just kind of putting a pin in that for whatever. But the Gemara is not getting into that whole Cheder Egel angle. I just wanted to be clear about that in case anybody was wondering. Okay, now, the Mishnah had said that until the Mishkan was built, the avodah was with the Bechors, and bamas were allowed, etc. Now, Yosef Rav Chana bar Rav Katina. Rav Chana bar Rav Katina was Kamed de Rav Chizda before Rav Chizda v'Kakari, and Rav Chizda was reading Vayishlach es nari b'nei Yisrael, right? It was nari b'nei Yisrael. It says in that pasuk that I read a minute ago that the Na'are B'nei Yisrael offered at Har Sinai olas, shlomims. So the shaila is, who are these Nari B'nai Yisrael? So if Chizda said, it's not in the text here, but the assumption is, the understanding is that if Chizda said that these are the Bechors, that the Bechors were the ones who were doing the avodah on Har Sinai, which would align with our Mishnah, right? That the Bechors did the avodah until the Mishkan, which means that Har Sinai, which was prior to the Mishkan, who was doing the avodah? The Bechors were still doing the avodah. Omar lay, to which Rav Chana responded, Hachi Omar Rav Asi, that Rav Asi says, Ufasku, that no. Already that day at Har Sinai, the Bechors were not doing the avodah. Already on that day, Nadav and Avihu were already doing the avodah on Har Sinai. And so Har Sinai was 40 days after Yetzias Mitzrayim. Nadav and Avihu died at the Chanukas HaMishkan, which was around a year later. And Nadav and Avihu were doing whatever avodah from Har Sinai and on until they died at the Chanukas HaMishkan. So Savilo Suve Mimas Nisan. So Rav Chizda thought to ask a question on Rav Chana from our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah says that the Bechors continued doing the avodah until the Mishkan was built, not Nadav and Avihu. However, Shami de Ka'amar Mishmei de Rav Adabar Ahava, however, Rav Chizda heard Rav Chana say more things that he disagreed with, so he held off from immediately asking him a question, and he heard out what Rav Chana also had to say, that Ola Sheikrivu Yisrael Bamidbar Eina Tuna Evshe V'nituach, that the Korban Ola, right, it says that these Nari B'nai Yisrael, whoever they were, whether the Bechors, whether Nadav and Avihu, they offered Olas and they offered Shlomim. Now, normally an Ola, of course, right, we talked about recently the hide of an Ola, right? The Korban Ola is skinned, and the meat is burnt without the skin on it. Now, Rav Chana had said, quoting Rav Adabar Ahava, that Ola sheikrivu Yisrael b'midbar, that this Ola at Har Sinai, Eina Tuna Evshe V'nituach, was not skinned and was not cut up into pieces. Now, it was at this point, Osve Braisa Deshavi B'chulu, that Rav Chizda now brought up a Braisa, instead of asking a kasha on Rav Chana from our Mishnah, with regard to the Bechors, he asked from a Braisa that mentioned not just the Bechors, but also the Hefshe V'nituach of the Ola. The Tana that we learned in the Braisa, Ad Sheloi Hukam HaMishkan, that prior to the erection of the Mishkan, Habamis Mutaris, private altars were permitted. V'avodah b'Bechayris, and who did the avodah? The Bechors, up until the Mishkan, which means that our Sinai, it was still the Bechors, it was not Nadav Avihu. V'akol ksher lakriv, and you can offer anything at that point, not just a behema, but even a chaya. Right? No, we don't offer korbanos from deer or anything, but at that point you can offer a deer. Ve'ov, birds, zecharim and nekevis, male, female, tmimin uvalimumin, whether unblemished, blemished, tehorin, pure, avalot tmei, no hogs, no tummy animals. V'akol kervu olas, and everything was simply offered as an ola. You burnt the whole thing. There was no shlomim and all sorts of other things. Everything was an ola. The ola sheikrivu Yisrael b'midbar tunefshe v'nituach, and says the Braisa that the olas that were offered at Har Sinai required hefshet v'nituach. Unlike Rav Chana said in the name of Rav Adabar that they did not require hefshet v'nituach. V'nochem b'zman hazeh r'shayin la'asos kein, and Gentiles Bisman hazeh are allowed to continue offering korbanos on bamas, because bamas were prohibited to the Yidden, but Gentiles can still continue offering korbanos on bamas. Tanai, so we say that this question of who did the avodah on Har Sinai, was it the Bechors, was it Nadav and Avihu, is take a machloikis. The Sanya that we learn in a Brisa, V'gama Kohanim anigoshim el Hashem yiskadoshu, that the pasuk says that the Kohanim, who are these Kohanim? That these Kohanim yiskadoshu. Literally it means that they won't go up on the mountain. They will stay away from the mountain. But also it can mean yiskadoshu, they were made holy. Rabbi Shua ben Korcha, Omer says Rabbi Shua ben Korcha is Precious Bechoris. This is talking about the Bechors. That the Bechors who were doing the avodah, they were told to stay off our Sinai. Rebbe Omer is Precious Nodav Avihu, whereas Rebbe says that this was a direction, this was a directive to Nodav and Avihu, that they should stay off of the mountain. So according to Rabbi Shua ben Korcha, it was the Bechors that were doing the avodah that day. According to Rebbe, it was Nodav and Avihu. Bishlam L'man is Precious Nodav Avihu. I understand according to Rebbe, who says that we're talking about Nodav and Avihu. Hainu dichsiv. This is what it says that after Nodav and Avihu died, the pasuk says. I'm going to read you the pasuk now. The pasuk is Vayomer Moshe laHaron, that Moses says to Aaron, Hu asher diber Hashem. This is what God spoke. Lemor bikrovai ekadesh, that with my close ones I will become holy. So back in the Gemara, Hu asher diber Hashem lemor bikrovei ekadesh. That where did he say b'kovei HaKadosh? Well, when the pasuk says, "V'gam Kohanim anigoshim el Hashem yiskadoshu," if that's a reference to Nodav and Avihu, so the Rabbanei Shalom said, "V'gam Kohanim anigoshim el Hashem yiskadoshu," and Moshe Rabbeinu relays that the Rabbanei Shalom said b'kovei HaKadosh, that these Kohanim, Nodav and Avihu, my close ones, yiskadoshu ekadesh, and Moshe Rabbeinu relayed that to Aharon. When Nadav and Avihu died, that when they died, it was Bekrovai Ekadesh. Elamanda Amaz Precious Bechoris Heicha. But according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who says that it's a reference to the Bechoris, so then when Moshe Rabbeinu says Bekrovai Ekadesh, what's that a reference to? So Dichsivno Ad Tishama Livnei Yisrael V'Nikdash Bechvodi. That another pasuk says about the oil moyed, that I will be there for the Bnei Yisrael and the oil moyed v'nikdash and be holy b'chvodi al tikveh b'chvodi ele b'mechubadai. Those who are honorable to me, I will be made holy. And that was a reference to Nadav and Avihu. Davar zeh rimazeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe. Now this was alluded to, right? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say to Moshe Rabbeinu explicitly that Nadav and Avihu are going to die, but it was alluded to Moshe Rabbeinu v'lo yadao, and he didn't realize it ad shemesu b'nei Aharon, until Nadav and Avihu died, and he understood. He connected the dots. Came shemesu b'nei Aharon, and when Nadav and Avihu died, Amalai, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Aharon, Aharon achi, my brother Aharon, lemesu banecha ela lehakdish mashal kadosh baruch Hu, that Nadav and Avihu died in order to be Mikadesh, the shame of the Rabbanei Shalom. Came Chayoda Aharon Shebonov Yidui Makamein, when Aharon realized and knew that his children were so close to the Rabbanei Shalom that Bekrovei HaKadesh Shosak V'Kibel Socher. Aharon was quiet when he heard the Besaira, and he received reward for that. Shenemar Vayidom Aharon. It says that Aharon was quiet when he heard the Besaira Hanara Mikol. V'chein Aidei Duviru Omer. It says by David, Dom La Hashem V'Schol Elo Afal Pisha Mapilucho Chalalim. Even when the Rabbanei Shalom is, people that are close to you are dying, Chalalim At Shtok, keep quiet. V'chein B'Shloima. It says by Shloima Melech Omer, Eis Lachshois, Veis Lidaber. There are times to speak and times to be quiet and times to speak. Paim Sheshoisek Mekabel Socher. Times you are quiet and receive reward for being quiet. Halashtika. Paim Shemidaber Umekabel Socher Aladibor. And there are times when there are times to speak and you receive reward for speaking at those times. But there are times to be quiet and there are times to speak. What does it mean that God is awed from His holiness? From those who are holy, when the Rabbanei Shalom has din with those who are holy to Him, He is feared and raised up and praised. Okay. Fine. What just happened? Well, we had a discussion there about who was doing the avodah on Har Sinai, and it's a machlokes whether it was the bechors or whether it was Nadav and Avihu, which then led to a discussion about the death of Nadav and Avihu. And how Nadav and Avihu sounds like they were. It's interesting, right? It sounds like basically, right, Aharon he accepted the Besorah and he was quiet when he realized that it was Mekadesh Shemayim, and that Nadav and Avihu were very close. So it's an interesting perspective, right? We always have the perspective of Nadav and Avihu. They're like, I think maybe they went into they were drunk and they offered an Eish Zara, this foreign fire, etc. Here there's an angle of Davka. They were Bekrovai Kadesh, B'miyudai, that they were so close to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and the Rebbeinu Shalom took them out of holiness, and that Aharon accepted it. Very interesting. I feel like it's slightly warmer angle than anything that we're usually accustomed to. Elikasha Ola. Okay, getting back to we had two questions, right? Who did the avodah on Har Sinai? So machlokes, bechors or Nadav and Avihu. And the other question was, did they skin and cut up the Ola at Har Sinai or not? So kasha Ola. So trei Tanoi, it's also machlokes Tanoim the Tani Rabbi Yishmael. It says Rabbi Yishmael klalois nemu b'Sinai ufratos b'Oel Moed. The general rules were mentioned at Har Sinai, but the details of those rules were only later on at the Oil Moed, at the Mishkan, and therefore at Har Sinai, when there was a directive to bring an Ola, you simply brought an Ola. You didn't skin it, you didn't cut it up. Later on, those halachas were learned. Whereas Rabbi Kiva says, Rabbi Kiva klalos ufratos nemu b'Sinai. No, everything was given at Har Sinai. The general rules, the details, and therefore they did know to skin it and to cut it up. The nishnu ba'Oil Moed, they were repeated at Oil Moed v'nishtalshu. And then in Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu repeated them Nachamol a third time as well. So therefore, even at Har Sinai, they were cutting up and skinning the Olas. Friends, that was the Kuf Tezvav of Masechta Zevachim. So as I mentioned in the introduction, there were kind of two sections to Kuf Tezvav: the difficult section and the not difficult section. The difficult section, we talked about Asham bachutz for mechuser zman. Sheesh, that was tricky. Bigadol, there was a machlokes of Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi and Rav Huna. Rav Chilkiah had said that your potter, when it comes to an asham bachutz from mechuser zman, if it's slaughtered as an asham. However, you can be chayiv for it if it is slaughtered as an ola, if it's slaughtered shelo lishma. Whereas Rav Huna said, no, ma pitom, you cannot be chayiv shelo lishma, because if lishma, you're potter and it's apostle korban, doing it shelo lishma is not all of a sudden going to make it kosher. Okay. And then we got into the question of who was responsible for the avodah on Mount Sinai, and we kind of transitioned here into the next part of our big Mishnah from the other day, where we start talking about the Mishkan and who is doing the avodah and bamas and things like that. I'm kind of hopeful that the next few days will hopefully let us chill out a little bit and breathe after like 4 months. But anyways, regardless, we had a very interesting discussion here between machlokes between Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. It also affected Rav Chizda and Rav Chana, other people. But anyways, Bigadol, the machlokes Tanoim here was that Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha says that it was the bechors who did the avodah on Har Sinai, and it was Rebbe who says that it was Nadav and Avihu who did avodas on Har Sinai, which then led to a discussion about the death of Nadav and Avihu and how they were so close to the Rebbeinu Shalom, Bekrovai Kadesh and Vayido Maharin. Very, very interesting Gemara over there, friends. I hope you enjoyed Daf Kuf Tezvav of Masechta Zevachim. Cheers.